I just want to talk about stuff that is, I'm not sure whether it's improvisation or innovation, but somewhere in between. Some of them will be both. But really about a whole bunch of stuff that if I posted on social media, I'd probably get flamed, but it works. So it's not stupid, in my humble opinion. So just a bit of a light-hearted look at some improvisation, some workarounds, things I've done when I've forgotten stuff on a field trip, and how we got on the air anyway. How I got in amateur radio? Well, I think my first introduction to radio of any sort was in the Cessna with my dad, then followed by the lovely sound of AM radio on 27 megahertz on the boat, and then into CBs for vehicle-to-vehicle communication, and then ultimately some HF stuff for long-distance touring. My mum, when I was 9, bought me the first edition of Dick Smith's Funway into Electronics, and that's how I tried to find a picture of that, but unfortunately the best I could do was the 20-second printing. Nevertheless, I think the front cover was pretty much the same. So that's how I came to be interested in radio and into amateur radio. Yeah, improvisation, innovation. I'm not sure where most of this talk comes, but I'm hoping there's some innovative things that you get out of this. Also, it's a little bit about making do. For the longest time, I was really only interested in VHF, UHF, and above. And then, quite by accident, I got introduced to SOTA. Thank you, Justin. And I thought, oh, this is pretty cool. And I found a use for HF. So I thought, all right, let's give this a crack. Now, the thing is, the only HF radio I had was my trusty Barrett 550 that I'd used in the vehicle for long-distance touring in the middle of nowhere. Now, for those of you who don't know what a Barrett is, it's an Australian-made commercial radio. Weighs about 3 kilos. Not particularly good for SOTA, but it's all I had, so I thought, we'll just give this a crack. I think I did about 30 summits with that radio before I decided to buy something lighter. But it works. And I grabbed I had a vertical whip, and I decided I'd just do single band, and most of my activations have either been on 23 centimetres or 40 metres, or 40 metres with this radio. I just put together a simple HF vertical whip, mounted on a couple of small pieces of aluminium tube, and 2 ground wires. Not optimal antenna, but you don't have to be optimal for SOTA. It's a sprint. You just need to get 4 contacts. You don't need to have a substantial antenna mount. Use whatever you can find. I have never ever put out what I've seen people on Instagram and Facebook, and they have this nice antennas erected with ground poles and all the bits and pieces. I've never ever done that. Use the trig point. There's always a trig point. If not, jam it in between a piece of rock. You only have to. You don't have to. It doesn't have to withstand the winter storms. You've just got to get 4 contacts, right? Tied onto a lump of stump or anything you can find. You'll notice in that centre photo there, I've got what looks like a squid pole, except that it's very straight. It is, in fact, a telescopic aluminium mast, which was given to me many years ago. I believe it is a temporary vertical extendable whip that came off a tank. It's about 5.5 metres long, so it's just long enough for a link dipole. It's a little heavy. I have graduated to a fiberglass arrangement now, but that's what I had back when I started, and so that's what I used. For those of you who haven't done SOTA, I'd highly encourage you to give it a crack. It's a great way to get outdoors. It's a great way to enjoy radio. It's a really good way of of getting out and about and getting some sunshine, picking up some great views from the top of the mountains, up until it's not. Many mountains in Tasmania seem to have communications facilities on them, so often there's somewhere to hide around the side of a building or something. That photograph of my antenna there, it looks like it's against a plaster wall, but it's actually just the fog. I'm sure it was at least 2 degrees that day up there. And then you get some of the sunny days where there's also no view. We've got a lot of mountaintops that have got trees on them. And that's one of the disappointing things. I started the first few summits were summits that were high, and then I started doing some lower ones, and I ran into a lot of this. I've made it to the top of the hill, but there's nothing to see. Everyone has a different thing in SOTA. Justin tries to get lots of points. I've never been back and worked a summit twice. It's like once I've done that one, I've done that one. That's my personal SOTA journey. I've been fortunate enough over the years to work in the telecommunications industry and have had access to some pretty good sites, which is how Justin accidentally introduced me to it. So I've had access to some reasonable times. What I would say is it's a sprint activity. Take your gear with you. Use those opportunistic moments. If you're on a work trip somewhere, or dare I say a family picnic or something, sometimes you can. Maybe that might be pushing it too far, but I've done lots of SOTA activations opportunistically when I've been somewhere for work. I was in South Australia one day doing some consulting, and I took with me an end-fed half-wave, but I'd never used one of these before, and it was loaned to me by VK7BEN. And when I first tried to use it, I had infinite SWR. This turns out not to have been a problem with the antenna that Ben loaned me, but the fact that I didn't realise that I couldn't drop the ballon on the ground. It needs to be a good half a metre off the ground, or it suffers badly. Anyway, I thought, no, it's dud. What can I do about this? I'm in a foreign country. South Australia's almost a foreign country. I had absolutely no tools with me, so I went to JCAR. I used their cutting ruler to measure off a 40-metre dipole. I used some pliers out of the rack to strip the ends of it off before I purchased it. And I bought a PL259 connector and a banana plug and a roll of tape. And so then I proceeded to head off to the seclusion of my first summit location. For those of you who've been here, you'll find it's not the easiest place to work SOTA. Mount Lofty's complete with a visitor centre, a cafeteria, a gift shop, and lots of people. I tried in vain to activate this on 2 metres, just because I didn't want to set up the gear. Alas, no one was listening on the call channel. So I did find, within the 25-metre activation zone, just around the corner, a little spot, which looks like the middle of nowhere, but is in actual fact only about 6 metres from the car park. And I managed to get that activation. So, sometimes you have to make lots of workarounds and things when you're working SOTA. Once again, on a work trip, I was fortunate enough to get to a place called Miller's Bluff in central Tasmania. It's about a 2-day walk in each direction to get to this, and the last day there is actually no defined track. So I was very fortunate to leverage some transport from my employer. It was a particularly challenging day and cold, as you can see from the amount of cloud we had. Our helicopter pilot was somewhat heroic, I believe, in getting us in that day, and he was very nervous about getting us out, but we got there. Again, I took nothing to put the antenna up. Just find something to find something to bit of rock to jam it in, a bush or something to tie it to. Justin introduced me to Velcro about halfway through my journey, which was even better than what I'd been doing. I'd been using little bits of rope. Velcro is awesome for just attaching to anything. Yeah, so that was one of my favourite activations. That one, and I think I'm still the only one on that one, Justin. For those who wonder, we did get the job done that day. We didn't play radio all day, and the weather did clear at some point. Eventually, of course, I decided that the Barrett was just a bit heavy, and I ran out of summits that were, less than a kilometre or two to walk to the top of. So I lashed out and bought the first of my Yaesus, this is the little 818, and this is on its first outing. You can see I'm still using the sealed lead acid battery there before the LiPo arrived. But still, it was an advance. It just weighed a fraction. So I hiked out to this particular summit. I was very excited to try the new radio. In the changing of the kit in my bag, I tipped everything out and then put everything back in. And I managed to forget one of the main things you need when you're doing a SOTA activation. I had the radio, I had the microphone, I've left that behind before. I had the battery, I had the antenna, even had the squid pole. I'd forgotten anything to write on. However, you can improvise. Just use a piece of bark. And there's a few people in this room who can probably see their call signs on there. After that, I started doing some activations on 23 centimetres. I have 4 or 5 23 centimetre only summits. I started out with a radio which probably should have been on this display over here because it's old enough, which is an old ICOM 23 centimetre handheld. And you don't need much of an antenna on 23 centimetres. We have in Hobart a fantastic dolerite passive reflector in Mount Wellington there with a huge capture area. As long as you can see that, you can always work a lot of people locally. Sometimes you go to places and you need a little bit more. This is an old field day setup that I modified and put one of my other 23 centimetre radios in for a bit more power. Like I think we had 10 watts out of that radio. Again, you can see I've lightened the rig there. I'm using a piece of conduit there for a mast just jammed in the rocks. Done a lot of portable operation on 23 centimetres as well. It's a great band, you don't need much gear. As you can see there, I've got it tied to the fence post, ratchet tie down to the back of the car, and you don't even need coax. After my first few activations, I realised I could just plug the radio straight into the antenna, and if you needed to see the screen, just put a right angle connector in, and you can see the screen. This is only useful when you need to give signal reports. If you don't need to give signal reports, it doesn't really matter. 2 slides of that. Now, sometimes it's a bit cold to be outside in Tassie, and so I screwed this onto the PL259 with an adapter on the front of my bull bar. And I used this in a few places portable. The problem with that is a few of the places that I was trying to use it were a bit close to our mountain, and bull bars don't have a lot of flex in them, unlike the roof of one's car. This is how you get elevation. So yeah, it's not stupid, it worked. But if I put it on social media, I'm sure I would be hounded away by the people telling me how silly that was. I've improvised with lots of things over the years on field days. Here's an arrangement that I built out of a couple of pieces of aluminium to mount some radios and sit in the back seat of the car. you can see I had just a dual band antenna on the roof, 23 centimetre Yagi and a 5/8 2 metre antenna on the bull bar that I used for 6 metres. The picture on the right of screen there, I actually had, that was a field day, and I think it was a 2018 or 17. Yes, we've got those results. I looked at them the other day because I actually managed the longest 6 metre, or the longest verified contact for the contest on 6 metres to a VK4, just running 5 watts or 6 watts out of the FT818. So I was very happy with that contact. The picture on the left-hand side was another field day where I was running just the 4 bands. My trusty 10 watt Yaesu 23 centimetre had developed a transmit fault, so I'd fallen back to the handheld, just 1 watt, but we can get through to Launceston from here on 1 watt, so still some pretty useful scores for a field day. And again, I had a packing issue because the FT6200 has an N connector on the back, and the handheld has a TNC on the top. Now, I'm sure all of you know that RF connector-wise, TNC, N connector is, stop laughing just, is exactly the same on the inside. It's just the outer connecting ring and the sealing mechanism that's different. So you just need to discard the outer ring. And as I had my work car with me on this day, I just happened to have an angle grinder with me. So I cut the outer ring off the N connector, and presto, plugs into the handheld. It's not stupid if it works. I got a lot of points on that cable that day. Yes, you can, it's not a very good picture, I'm sorry. And then there's sometimes where you need to improvise at home. We built some, we modified some commercial 9 centimetre gear. I'm not quite sure where we ended up getting that from, Justin. Geelong. And it came with some really excellent instructions on how to modify it, and we had a bit of a club working bee, and we modified a few of these. And then we needed to try it. So on the right-hand side of the screen there, you can see my you can see a mast that I bolted to the shed roof at the back with the panel where we were testing it. I didn't have any feed line or power, and I certainly didn't have push to torque from the shack out to the shed. So we just did a shack and a milk crate, and you can see I had the trusty 23 centimetre radio on the mast there for the chat channel to line that dish up. And so that was my first 9 centimetre contact from the roof of my shed. Only one of my neighbours poked their head up to have a look at what I was doing. They're used to the stuff I do, so they didn't make any particularly crazy comments. This next, the next photo I'm going to show you is not my improvisation, but one that's been doing the round on Facebook, and I actually tracked down the guy who originally posted it, N7YRT. A number of times I've spent hours making temporary mounts to put radios in rental cars or company vehicles or something, and this guy just cut two pieces of pool noodle off and jammed it in the console. I'm like, I will so be doing that in the future. And I wrote to him and said, listen, I'm doing a presentation, can I use your picture? And he's like, yeah, sure. Here's another improvisation at home. Probably about 10 years ago or more, maybe, there was a pretty good 6 metre opening, and my trusty 6 metre radio died. The 551D died, and I went out to the shed and I brought in the 502, which is actually on display over here in part of the museum, history, whatever. I don't know how you guys used to use them in the past. It's only a bit of a guess as to what frequency you're on. You know, the dial sort of gives you some indication. Now, it's really easy in a 6 metre opening to find the call channel. There's lots of people there, you just tune it up. But as soon as they say, yes, can we QSY to this frequency, it then becomes a little tricky. So I ended up just finding my frequency counter and putting an antenna on it, and it inductively coupled enough, and you can see the frequency there. So as soon as I started to transmit, I could see what frequency I was on and adjust. So I don't know how these used to work in the old days. I suspect people had a lot more patience than they do now. One of the other improvisations I do at home is I don't really have anywhere to put HF antennas. So twice a year, once for the RD and once for the Oceania, I put up a bit of a vertical in the front yard, which is a little bit obtrusive to the neighbours, but a couple of days a year they let me get away with it. Now, the instructions that come from DX Engineering on how to put one of these Hustler antennas in, they're extensive. They're extensive and they're good, but to follow the book, I think would take maybe a week and cost the equivalent of a small European holiday. However, all you need really is something to stand the mast up and lots of ground radials. So this is just my effort at bolting together a couple of pieces of second-hand Unistrut and sitting them on the ground. And for ground radials, I've literally used whatever I had in the shack. I think I've got 16 there. About half of them are stainless, half of them are copper. I know stainless is not ideal, but 8 stainless radials added to the 8 copper ones is better than not having them there. I've proved that. What antenna raising would be complete without assembling it over the wheelie bin? And there we have my HF radio station when I set it up at home. It's just in the front yard. This year, unfortunately, I was in Queensland for the Oceania DX contest. And because I always like to work at least GN in the contest, I took courtesy of Hayden, a DX commander. Now I notice there's an expeditioner on the table over here as a prize, which is exactly the one I took to Queensland. They set up pretty easily, but when they come there, a kit, you have to build them. I did take my VNA with me to make tuning it a possibility, and I took a few basic tools with me. The one thing I forgot to take was a tape measure, which is kind of important when you're building an antenna that just comes as a roll of 100-metre wire and you have to cut it all up. We were house sitting a house. I rummaged around. The closest thing I could find was a steel ruler, 300mm steel ruler. And I thought this is going to take a long time to measure these things out. But I measured one of the tiles in the living area and I discovered that the living area and the hallway were all tiled with these tiles which were exactly 304mm. I'm like, aha. So I made a spreadsheet and then I just cut by tiles, you know. This is 17.2 tiles measured off, cut. So it's near enough for HF. We tune it afterwards. There's always a way of improvising. There's always a way of improvising and making do. You don't have to have all the perfect gear. So yes, we got on air and we made a few contacts, but I did fail to get hold of GN. He's giving me the death stares at the moment. Sometimes you make improvisations and you never ever get around to unimprovising them. A few years ago, maybe 10, I made this Kia for my FT991. It's yet to get past this stage. So. A few years ago, Richard at ZBX and myself were fortunate enough to acquire this magnificent field day van, complete with telescopic mast. It used to be an ABC outdoor broadcast van. It has allowed us an amazing all-weather place to work field days, and it's literally changed our field day experience from very haphazard to quite good. When we got this van, it had that mast. The mast was only ever designed for things to go on the top. And we had to come up with a way of mounting antennas on the mast that didn't damage all the nice slidey pieces and the seals, and each pneumatic, it needs the seals to work. Enter 3D printing. Now, I'm sure all of you have had some experience with 3D printing. There's a couple of ways of getting into 3D printing. The way I would highly recommend is the easy way. Have a friend who likes it. We've had all these brackets have been printed by Ken VK7 KRJ, thank you, they've actually come out pretty well. For those of you who think 3D printing's easy, it kind of is. The photo that's missing out of this slide deck is the 2 wheelie bins full of, it's not quite right. I think there's probably around 30 of these sitting in the wheelie bin by the time we're finished. So yeah, it's great. I'd highly recommend 3D printing for all the little gadgets and stuff. We've certainly appreciated that. All bands 6 metres to 3 centimetres, except for 6 centimetres. We have that on order. It's just another picture of the van with the 3 centimetre kit set up. Now, in the vein of it's not stupid if it works, this is probably, I don't know, the most gangster shit I've ever seen. This is a tower that rotates. Now, this photo here, I wish I didn't take a photo of it. I couldn't find a photo of it before we started to tip it over. On this particular day, Richard and I were helping. This belongs to VK7 DX, who's a prolific 6 metre guy, and if any of you are into 6 metres, I'm sure you've probably come across him. This whole mast rotates. It's all steel except for the axle driven elements of that antenna. And if we have a look at the base of it, we can see it's literally just an excavator track frame and slew ring. And when I say gangster, I mean there is no care given here. If you put your arm or your finger in any of this, you're just losing it. There is no limit switches. There is no safety. There's no covers on anything. But it works really, really well. I thought, I can't leave that out. It's definitely innovation or improvisation. I'm not sure which, but it worked really well. And if I ever manage to get myself a rural property where I can use an excavator track frame, I think maybe a slightly safer version of this would be on the cards. Improvisation again at home. This would be a very familiar sight to anyone who's into the microwave bands. The transverter, amp, waveguide, preamp, everything's sitting mounted on the back of the dish. The only thing wrong with this is it's not waterproof. It's not even slightly rainproof. I wanted to use this over the weekend of the RD contest, and there was lots of rain forecast. So I thought, well, you know what? We don't have to do anything elaborate. It just has to last for a day, right? We just have to not let it get wet for a day. So put it in a box. This is a packing box that I've made from plywood. It does attenuate the signal a little, but when you're bouncing it off Mount Wellington, we had plenty of signal at the beginning of the weekend. We lost about 6 dB by the end of the weekend after it rained, and we got a little bit of rain on the plywood, but still enough to get through. All you need to do is ratchet it down to the back of the ute so it doesn't blow away, and run the feed lines into the shack. Elevation. Oh yes, elevation was via a piece of wood under the back of the dish inside the box there. You can probably see in that right-hand photo.